What's up, guys? Application Renovation, episode 4, coming your way right now. I had a blast while I was recording these, and if you like these, leave a comment, give a like, subscribe, and let me know that you want more of these episodes. If you are looking for some more help with your application, whether it's personal statements, building a school list, helping with your secondaries, or even interview prep, look no further than Next Step Test Prep Admissions Consulting. They are the sponsor of Application Renovation, and they are who I've partnered with. I screen all of their advisors to make sure that their advisors meet my standards, so that when you go there, you know that you are getting the best possible consulting available to help you maximize your application, hopefully the first time. If you would like some help from Next Step Test Prep, go to nextsteptestprep.com. They have a phone number that you can call for a free consultation with one of their admissions consultants. Again, nextsteptestprep.com, and use the promo code MSHQ to save some money. Let's go ahead and jump into episode 4 of Application Renovation. So we have our student with us. We'll call her Jane. Jane, how are you?
Good, thanks.
All right. So let's talk about the general application for you. I'm looking at the submission date for your application, and it's 2017. So you've skipped a year with the application service. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And looking at the application, you applied in July, which is decent, and you were approved, verified. So you submitted July 6th, you were verified August 2nd, so almost a month. And that's why we tell students all the time, like, apply as early as you can, because that verification process can take a long time. So you applied early, which is great. A huge mistake that students make is not applying early, and you were able to do that. Take us through why you think you weren't successful with your application cycle 2 years ago.
I would say probably the worst part of my application is my undergrad grades. So my undergraduate career, even though it ended over 10 years ago, was not awesome. So I think that was a big factor. And then also my Mcat score was like super average. It wasn't stellar by any means. So having both of those aspects be not super weak, but just not like stellar, I think it actually just eliminated me from my top schools because my scores weren't high enough.
Yeah.
And then also I think my writing was maybe less personal. I don't think it told the story clearly. I don't think I expressed myself necessarily the way that I wanted to. When I did this application, it was I just finished a crazy semester. I was cramming to try to study for the Mcat, which I didn't even do as well as I should have. And then just through the application and didn't take my time with it, I guess, the way I should have.
Okay. So it sounds like potentially a lot of different compounding mistakes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
And that's a potential issue, right? There's so many different parts to this application that even if one part of the application looks stellar, small little missteps here and there compound, and by the end, when the admissions committee, the person reading your application kind of gets to the end, they're like underwhelmed, right? Because there was just so many little things here and there. And you mentioned your undergrad grades, so let's go ahead and jump right to that right now. Okay. So I was glancing through the application earlier, and we're scrolling through it now. You started off freshman year getting an AB, a BC, B's, A, B's, B's, D's, and sophomore year. So freshman year, it was okay, nothing outstanding. And then sophomore year started off with a D, and then a C, and a lot of B's, and another C, and a couple more C's, and an F. That hurt. And
Yeah.
so not great grades. Junior year, going into senior year, some more Fs, another C, or some more Cs and another F, a D. Talk about uh, it when it comes to the application, right? When an admissions committee member sees those grades, the first thing that goes through their mind is why. And so
Right.
when you were doing your application, were you trying to explain that in your application, in your essays, potentially maybe in a disadvantaged essay? How were you going across explaining that?
Yeah. So I'm pretty explicit about it in my personal statement.
Okay.
I, experienced a really traumatic event in high school, and I was still dealing with the aftermath of that, which was, um, you know, intense therapy. And I mean, I was really depressed and just dealing with a lot of like mental health stuff.
Yeah.
So school was kind of it was not my highest priority at that time in my life, to say the least. So, and I'm really explicit about it in my
Yeah.
personal statement, which
I
I'm not
saw.
sure that that's the best,
Yeah.
the best thing to do, but I felt like it deserved a clear explanation.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad you brought up that. I'm not sure if it's the best thing to do, so we'll talk about that because unfortunately, I get a lot of questions
Sure.
about rape, which is what you talk about in your personal statement.
Yeah.
I get way too many emails from students from women. I haven't gotten any from men yet, but I don't want to exclude men from that discussion. But way too many emails from women about being raped and whether or not they should put that in their personal statement. And for some of them, it was that spark that was like, I think I want to be a physician so I can help others who are in my position. And so
Sure.
there are potential ways to talk about it. There are ways that you talked about it, which is a little bit more explicit. So we can talk about that, which I think is good.
Okay.
So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Not fun event in your life. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um, all right. So looking back at your application, so I'm gonna jump to where we can see your grades. And so in the AMCAS application, when you print it out, you get the grid of grades here that just kind of lay out your life and your abilities, which a lot of students are like, oh no.
Yeah.
Freshman year, 3.5, right? Decent GPA, only 9 credit hours of BCPM, 6 credit hours of the other, so 15 total credit hours for freshman years, not a lot. So my question would be, why not a ton of hours there?
So I actually took my first semester of college off. I didn't start until spring.
Okay.
So my freshman year was really like that spring, and that spring I only took one class.
Okay.
And mostly because it was the first time I was living away from home. And I was doing treatment at that time,
Okay.
basically. So school, I just started really slow. I took one class that summer, and I think I ended up with a lot of credits at the end of those 2 periods of time, but most of them were transfer credits from high school, like AP credits and stuff like that. So I was just starting very slow just to make the transition easier on myself, basically.
Okay. All right. So freshman year, 3.5, sophomore year, 2.0, 5 credit hours of science. 0.758 hours. Now, a lot of times, if somebody's getting that low, there's usually some academic issues coming into play. Did the school ever reach out to you and say, hey, like, what's going on here?
Yeah, so I think I was placed on academic probation one semester,
Mm,
but that was it.
okay. So, if you were placed on academic probation, let's go ahead and look at your beginning here of your application. All right. So looking back at the earlier part of your application, there's this section for additional application information. And part of that is institutional actions. Now, you just told me you were put on academic probation. Why don't you have a yes there?
I'm not sure. I think I must have just not
thought about it.
Yeah, I don't know. Because actually, I'm not sure that I even realized that I was ever put on academic probation until later.
Okay.
Until I was actually looking through my transcripts more closely. Because I'm not sure that I even knew at the time.
Okay. And with everything else going on in your life, it's easy to have that slip through. So, so that's a potential thing that it's almost good potentially that you didn't get in, because if that came up later on, they're like, hey, like, we pulled your records and you were on probation and you didn't tell us that, and so now we're gonna rescind your acceptance. Right?
Okay.
I don't know if it would get that far. Hopefully they would ask for some clarifications, but that's always something we need to be cautious of. That's why every part of the application is so important to look through. All right, so going back to grades, you obviously knew at some point that you needed to do a postbac. Your life, it looks like, was getting back to somewhat normal because you crushed your postbac, right? A 3.89 with 41 credits, so you did great there. And you brought up your cumulative undergrad to a 3.26, which, coming from where you were starting at, that's pretty good. I think your saving grace was that you only had quick math here, 27 hours of undergraduate science credits.
Yeah.
And so with only 10 hours, even though those 10 hours were pretty atrocious, your 41 extra hours in your postbac really helped your undergrad GPA.
Yeah.
The one thing potentially holding you back at this point is that even though you weren't doing a lot of science courses, you were doing a lot of your all other courses, right? And still getting poor grades there. And so your cumulative overall undergraduate is less than a 3.0. So that potentially could hold you back from some schools that will screen based on total GPA. And so when it comes to applying, you may need to do some advocating if you're not planning on taking any more courses to say, I know one potential reason why my application may not be viewed at this point is my total GPA, including my postbac, is less than a 3.0. But if you look at my postbac at a 3.9 at 41 hours, right, you need to potentially advocate for yourself and give them a reason why they should look at your application. Go ahead.
Actually, just to amend that, so since I submitted this application, I've taken another year's worth of postbac classes.
Nice.
And now my cumulative is over. It's like a 3.0 something, but it's over that 3.0 threshold.
It's over. That's all we need.
So,
Awesome. Good. You're over. So mostly science courses that you've taken?
Yes. For one of the schools that I'm planning to apply to, they required a writing course. So I did take one research writing type class, but the rest of them have been science.
Okay. So your science GPA is probably up around what, 3.32-ish, maybe a little bit higher? Actually, no, probably higher.
I haven't figured it out with my undergrad stuff, but
that's fine.
I know it's like a 3.8. Above a 3.8 for my postbac at least.
So you've shown a tremendous upward trend, and so that's why we always talk about trends. You started pretty flatline, right? Well, you started pretty well at 3.5 and then flatline from there. You picked it a little bit up in your senior year, but again, your credit hours were so low. And then postbac at 41 hours your first year, postbac your second year, still crushing it. And so you're a great student when that application comes across the desk to go, yes, you've figured it out. There was obviously something that happened here we don't know what it is. Maybe you just weren't ready for college. You were immature. Maybe some traumatic event happened. Whatever that is, you've recovered from it, at least from a scholastic standpoint, and you've proven that you can handle the coursework. Okay. So GPA-wise, I don't think there's any issues for you. Yes, overall GPA isn't tremendous, but your trend is outstanding. And that's why it's impossible when a student comes and asks, right? They come and they hire an advisor and they ask, I have a 3.04 GPA. What are my chances of getting into medical school? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Do you look like this, where you start off terrible and end tremendous, or are you just terrible throughout? So there's just so many ways that it looks when it actually comes to graphing the GPA. And so let's talk about MCAT. Your MCAT, pretty average. Your biochem is 123, which may hold you back from some schools. Schools don't like to talk about it, but they'll filter based on GPAs. They'll filter based on MCAT scores. They may filter based on a section of the MCAT. And so what are your plans with the MCAT?
So I'm registered to take it April 13th. Okay. I'm in the middle of a Kaplan prep course at this point. So, I mean,
what are you shooting for?
Minimum, I'd like to get a 513.
Nice. Okay. And how are you doing on full-length exams?
I mean, kind of about the same as I was before. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't feel like I've done the prep that I need to at this point to really increase my score. But I mean, in the next 2 months, I'm hoping to do more.
Okay. Yeah. No hope.
And I'm also considering pushing the date back to May 11th just to give myself a little bit more time. But I don't know.
So May wouldn't be a terrible time. June is pushing it a little bit, but May would still be okay. You wouldn't potentially have your score back depending on how early you want to submit. But May 11th, you'd get your score back roughly June 11th, right? That month lag. And that would be fine to wait to submit your applications until then. That would be okay. Okay. So we got some plans for the MCAT. Let's talk about your experiences. So I looked through your experiences earlier, and I was a little underwhelmed with a lot of them. So you have physician shadowing listed many times, kind of one off here. My recommendation typically for shadowing, because it's such a kind of blah thing, right? It's like, I stood behind Dr. Smith and watched how she interacted with blah, 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 right? It's just really typically, by the strictest definition of what shadowing is, isn't a very impactful event. And when you have 5 hours here and 4 hours here and 2 hours here, you just combine them all into one and get it over with. So looking at that would probably be my biggest recommendation. And then for shadowing, you typically don't need big descriptions for it. If you wanted to combine them all and just list 1, 2, 3, the different physicians that you shadowed and go from there, would be okay for shadowing. I was super confused as to what these informational interviews were. Explain what these are to me.
So it's something that the pre-health advisor at our school told us to do. And it's basically like I sit down with a physician and ask them about their job.
So it's like shadowing without the shadowing.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's
a little mentoring maybe.
Yeah, and it was sort of a chance to get the physician's full attention maybe, so that
how dare you, patients? You're taking my attention.
Right. I guess I'm not. It was, in my personal opinion, like a complete waste of time and something that could have easily been done as part of shadowing.
Yeah.
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I agree. I'm glad you came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, sitting down at a coffee shop with a doctor and picking his or her brain and getting a sense of that, that's great, right? Students at this point where you are, I remember where I was. It's like, oh, you're a doctor. I want to talk to you, right? And so we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about interacting with physicians and just soaking in as much as possible.
Sure.
But then to turn it around and put it on an application as this 2-hour event of informational interview, I've never seen that before. And if I saw that, I'm like, I don't know what this point is. My assumption would be, wow, you're really struggling for extracurriculars that you have to fluff up your application with 2 hours here. And then you have more of them, right? You have
Yeah.
a leadership one there's next, but then you have some more shadowing and clinical observation on this next page at 4 hours, another informational interview at 2 hours. And so to me, that just seems like you're really stretching to try to fill in some information.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't like that. So I would probably, if you want to have it in your application to say, look at me, I've gone out, I've talked to physicians, again, I would probably combine those all into one as mentorship, as other and then mentorship instead of informational interview, just to kind of massage really what it was. Because it's really
Sure.
them mentoring you, kind of giving you their kind of life and path and encouragement and opinions and stuff like that.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
is mentorship.
Yes.
Okay. So those are some thoughts about those few things, and then so you have shadowing here, there, and everywhere, going up until May 2017. May 2017. You have 2016 on here. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, so you stopped shadowing a couple months before you submitted your application. And I would question why. Why would you stop shadowing before your application and not continue to plan on shadowing throughout your application?
I did actually
Okay.
continue shadowing. I guess I maybe just didn't know how to indicate that on the
Okay.
application.
So this is one of the confusing things, and that's why I highly, highly, highly encourage / require you right now to go out, and everybody watching this, go out and read the instruction manuals.
Okay.
When you put in date ranges, the stop date for something that you're continuing to plan on doing, you're planning to continue doing through the application cycle, the stop date can go as far as your expected matriculation of medical school. So for
Okay.
you applying July of 2017, your expected matriculation would be July or August of 2018.
Okay.
So that's when you would put your expected stop date there. So even though it hasn't happened yet, you can put the date range up until that point. And technically,
Gotcha.
you can add those expected hours in there as well. I don't
Okay.
like the hours part because I think that's a little bit of a white lie.
Right.
But that's what they tell you to do. So if you want to do that, go ahead. But definitely the date ranges help paint a better picture for the person reading your application.
Okay.
Okay. And then looking at, you have some leadership here from, which is interesting. So your leadership experience you put out until 2018. So you did it for one, but not other ones. So leadership is great. I'm a big storyteller. I love stories. And so when I'm reading your descriptions, I don't get a story. It's just like, I did this, I did this, I did this. Right?
Right.
You're continuing to do your mission. You're applying for nonprofit status. Continually inspired by struggling families. Like when I see something that says that, I'm continually inspired by struggling families. Tell me that story, right? Tell me a story of you interacting with one of these families that show me how you were inspired, that show me your mission.
Okay.
Much more impactful when you do that.
Yeah.
Okay? We talked about informational interviews, extracurriculars, so sponsorship committee chair. You talked about your daughter. So right off the bat, and this is just kind of how comfortable you are talking about it. Right off the bat, you are talking about like, hey, I have a daughter, right?
Right.
And that's okay. It's in your personal statement as well. And so it's separating you a little bit. It may bring in some biases from people, unfortunately, to go, oh, she's a mom. Yeah, I'll probably pass. You can't prevent that. So you just need to be yourself in your application as much as you're comfortable being yourself and you want to be yourself. And if you apply to a school where the person reading your application is like, oh, a parent, right? Oh, well, that's one less school you have to worry about, but you can't prevent that. So that's okay. The sponsorship committee chair. So talking about that, again, storytelling. You talked about leading a team of parents down uncomfortable path of requesting financial support, right? Tell that story. What did that look like? So storytelling. Okay.
And I'm not even sure that I'm going to leave that in there.
Okay.
but yeah, it was.
I don't know why not.
You say, okay. I guess there's nothing really exciting about it. It was more just something I felt like, it was like volunteering as part of her gymnastics team, and it was.
It's showing you. It's showing who you are, which is the most important part of the application. And I'm glad you said that, because a lot of students will go, it's not exciting. It doesn't help me stand out. How you stand out is by being you. And so there may be somebody who goes, oh, a parent, I don't want to look at that student. And you'll have somebody else who will look at it and go, oh, a parent, that's awesome. I know that they're going to bring organizational skills, leadership skills, management skills, because they are a parent. And by adding in this experience, by leaving it in there, you're showing them what you're doing to actually highlight those experiences or those skills without trying to sell those skills. Like, look at my leadership, look at my time management, blah, 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 blah. It's let me tell you a story of when I was on the sponsorship committee chair and how I impacted.
Okay.
Right? I would 100% leave that in.
Okay. Sounds good.
That's who you are, and that's what makes you different, and that is a good thing. Childcare services, you talked about being a stay-at-home mom and offering childcare services. Again, stories. Tell me a story of one of the kids. Maybe something bad happened one day and how you handled that stressful situation. Right? There's a 1,000,001 stories that you can tell. And then I think the biggest thing for me, we finally get to 2008 and 2010. You have 150 hours of clinical experience. And this is the first clinical experience on your application outside of shadowing, which, again, for me, doesn't count as clinical experience. It's separate.
Okay.
And so as I look at your application, as somebody going, is this a person who understands what he or she is getting themselves into? And I look at your experiences and I go, wow, you haven't been in a clinical setting outside of shadowing in 7 years.
Sure.
How have you proven to yourself, not just to me, but to yourself, that this is what you want to do? And so that would be probably one of the biggest red flags that you have on your application, is the lack of clinical experience.
Okay. So last summer, I did get my CNA license, and I've been working as a CNA for the last 8-ish months.
Love it.
So hopefully, so by the time I apply this year, it'll be almost a year.
Love it. Done. See?
So
maybe you've been listening to the podcast, and that encouraged you to do it.
I've listened to,
Good. Awesome.
I guess I fear about that to some extent, because I guess the other major thing that I've done in the last year is I added some research experience. So I did a volunteer research position at our local VA hospital. Okay. So that'll be on there as well. But now I feel like I'm doing that thing where I'm checking boxes, where just okay, I needed more clinical experience, so I went and did this, and I needed research experience, so I went and did this, and that it's not going to look as sincere had I done it.
It depends on how you talk about it in your application, and how, or write about it in your application, how you talk about it in your interviews. If it doesn't come off as sincere, then yeah, it may be at a detriment. But again, research aside, you needed the CNA stuff. For me, you needed it to prove to yourself that you liked being around sick people.
Sure.
And so that's a huge win in my book. And yes, it's a checkbox if you want to call it a checkbox, but I think it's a checkbox more for you than for the admissions committee. Research, great. You got some research. You didn't need to. You got some. All right. And again, depending on how passionate you are writing about it and talking about it, that will really make or break how authentic it sounds.
Okay.
So you got the clinical experience. Great. Again, storytell. Try to tell a story of these patients that you're interacting with.
Okay.
And then you have some older experience here as an office manager, which is great. And then reading your personal statement. Let's jump to your personal statement. I glanced through it earlier. To me, it sounds like a timeline / resume of kind of your life, and not necessarily a here's why I want to be a doctor. Okay. Right off the bat, you say, for as long as I can remember, I've been preparing to become a physician. Right? I don't want to read that first thing. And a lot of students start their personal statement in a very similar way. I have always known that I wanted to be a physician. My journey to be a physician started when blah, 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 blah. Right? If I read that to begin with, then I can probably bet that it's not going to be a very good personal statement. And because the whole goal of the personal statement is to tell me why you've been preparing your whole life to become a physician. So don't just tell me it. Like, take me through that journey.
Yeah.
Right? And so you kind of just start listing things. I shadowed a doctor in high school, and I participated in this program, and blah, 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 right? So just listing off a bunch of extracurriculars that you were doing from high school. You're like, I'm going to sneak them into my personal statement because the general rule of thumb for extracurriculars is not to put any high school stuff in there. So you're like, I'm going to sneak them in my personal statement. You found a little loophole there, which a lot of students try to do. So I would get rid of all of that and really just tell the story. What was your seed? What got you to this point where you wanted to shadow a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon? What got you interested in doing that in the first place? That's the question I want answered. And so show me that journey. Okay? And then you let's talk about the experience here that you wrote about. So you talked about being a gymnast. So kind of traumatic event number one, as somebody who identifies as an athlete, having that taken away from you is a traumatic experience. Okay? And then you go right into the next traumatic experience of being raped. Now, my general stance on this, and it's not a very strong stance, but my general stance is, for somebody reading about such a traumatic event, it's uncomfortable, right? It should be. It should make the person reading it uncomfortable, assuming they have some sort of feelings, if they're some sort of human. And while I always talk about showing and not telling, because you want to make people feel what you felt and see what you saw, talking about a traumatic event like this typically is one of those things that I'm like, do you really want the person reading your personal statement to be uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And so my general stance is, look, it's your story. Tell it if you have to. If you don't particularly have to use the words, I was raped, and you can just talk about, I had a traumatic event, people reading between the lines are going to understand what that is, and there's going to be a little bit less of a visceral response.
Okay.
My one asterisk to that is, if this is a huge part of why you want to be a physician, then be open, talk about it, explain why, and just understand, again, like we talked about with being a parent, and some people aren't going to like that, and being raped and talking about it in your personal statement, some people are just going to be turned off by that, and maybe they've had their own experiences, right, with
Sure.
rape, and they're gonna just want to not go down that path. Maybe they haven't been through therapy like you've been through, and so they're
Yeah.
just gonna stop reading. And so
Right.
it's one of those things that I don't want to tell you what to do. I try to throw out all of the different ways that it may be read,
Yeah.
and choose your own adventure and pick the path. But at the core, you need to be true to who you are. Okay.
Okay.
And so if you think you can still tell your story really well by lessening the words a little bit to
hmm
appease, and I know it's appeasing the reader, but if you can lessen it by saying after a traumatic event and not whatever recovering or whatever words that come out,
Yeah.
that may be better in the long run.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay, and so that's my general response when somebody asks about putting something like that in their personal statement.
Okay.
So you have a pretty long path. So the first paragraph we talked about is basically just a list of stuff going on. And then
Yeah.
second paragraph is traumatic events with being an athlete and the rape. And then more red flag stuff in the next paragraph about not excelling academically in most of your undergrad classes and kind of what you did to overcome it. At this point, like, I need you to move on and get to the core of what a personal statement is,
Okay.
which is tell me why you want to be a doctor.
Right.
Okay. So red flag stuff should be as short as possible. Give me a little bit of insight into what happened so I understand when I go and look at your grades to go, okay, now I know traumatic event and struggling in college. Great. That's all I need to know. I don't need to go in depth other than that.
Okay.
Because I have the rest. I have your postbac that shows, look, 389. Awesome. Okay.
Okay.
Then you talk about the birth of your daughter, right? And catapulting yourself into adulthood. And so there's just more words that aren't leading down to why do you want to be a doctor, right? You're just
Okay.
kind of it's kind of an autobiography at this point, right?
Yeah.
Second child, type 1 diabetes, right? More autobiography. What I'm assuming is you're just trying to explain kind of your journey and your path as to why it's taken so long to get to this point.
Yeah.
And just show who you are. But again, I need to know why you want to be a doctor, and I don't know that yet, other than you said that you were born to be a doctor, or whatever you said at the beginning. Okay.
Right.
Again, you talk about your son a ton here, and about the decision making and kind of responsibility of being his caretaker as a type 1 diabetic. I mean, my dad was a type 1 diabetic, but he wasn't diagnosed until he was 13. So a 14-month-old, I can't imagine the struggles going through that. And so obviously a huge burden for you, huge responsibility for you. And you try to sell it here by talking about your empathy and compassion. I don't think you need to sell here. You don't need to sell yourself. Obviously, you're going to be empathetic and compassionate to your own son, I would hope. And you don't need to say, look, I'm empathetic and compassionate and to my son who's a diabetic, and I'm going to be empathetic and compassionate as a physician. You don't need to have those take homes in your personal statement.
Okay.
I want to know why, right? The question always why, and most students talk about what. So you talk about what, that the magnitude of responsibility I will carry as a physician. So that's what you're going to do with that experience. Instead of why that experience further solidified in your mind that you want to be a doctor.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Again, you talk about you possess the skills required to coordinate care. Okay? Right? You're going to learn that as a physician. You're going to go through residency and fellowship or whatever you're going to go through. You'll learn that. You don't need to prove to me now because you've taken care of your son that means you're gonna be a doctor. Okay. And then the final stuff about kind of what you've been through and being respectful of relationships and sharing knowledge and strength. That's kind of a good conclusion. I always tell students to try to go bigger, bigger in terms of what do you hope to accomplish as a physician.
Okay.
So my biggest question after reading the personal statement is still why. Why are you doing this? Okay. So focus more on that.
All right. I wish I had a really clear answer for that. I feel like that's the hardest thing to answer, but yeah.
It is hard to answer, but it's doable. It just takes a little work to get there.
Okay.
And then school list. Talk to me about how you selected schools.
I wasn't really paying a lot of attention.
Okay.
I mean, it was, mostly because I would like to avoid moving our entire family if possible. My kids are 8 and 11 now, so they're, they have friend groups. This is, moving at this point when my daughter's in middle school is a little bit more of an issue than it would be if she was younger. So, my is to stay where I live. And then other than that, I'm applying like close by.
Yeah. And so location for non-traditional students is huge. And so my recommendation for you is if you haven't already, start reaching out to these schools. Start making your name known. Go to open houses if they have them. Just let them know and say, hey, I'm getting ready to apply in June. Here's a little bit of my story. Do you have any other recommendations for me?
Okay.
Right. Just try to don't bug them just to bug them. But if you have a good question that you can come up with that you really need answered, you're really inquisitive about, then definitely reach out and let them know. And be open and honest to let them know, like, I'm a non-traditional student. I have kids who are 8 and 11, and I really want to stay in the area, and I love this school because of XYZ. And just make it known. And potentially, like, for somebody in your shoes to say, look, here's my upward trend with my GPA. Here's my first Mcat score. I know you can't tell me what score to get, but is there a general range that you like to see in somebody like myself, in students like myself? Sure. So asking those types of questions, I think, would be valuable. And just for somebody who needs to stay in an area, advocating for yourself as much as possible is really key.
Okay. Do you recommend like reaching directly to an admissions committee member?
I would reach out to the admissions department there,
the general department, because I only asked that because at my first choice school I know that there is like the dean or the vice, I don't know, one of the deans of admission applied when she also had kids, and so I was thinking about reaching out directly to her and just asking her how she felt I should talk about that in the application.
Do it. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. If you have that connection there, do it.
All right. Sounds good.
Are you planning to apply to DO schools if there are any in your area?
Yeah. Yes, I am definitely. I feel like most of my shadowing experience is actually with a DO. There's not one directly in the town that we're living in right now, but there are some close by. Okay. So that's definitely a top option.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
Gosh, I don't. Not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, I think so. As far as the renovation part of your application, you've done a ton of it already, right? Having applied 2 years ago, you've had a year since we're talking now, between applying and now, where you've been working as a CNA for 8 months. You're working on your MCAT. You've taken a year of more classes and gotten great grades. And so you are doing everything that you need to be doing to put forward a successful application the next time. Now, the full picture is tell better stories in your experiences. Write a much better personal statement. If you don't have my personal statement book, I'll send you one, and we'll get you on the right track for that. Because it's not just grades and MCAT score. Everybody likes to think it's grades and MCAT score, grades and MCAT score. But it's telling that story of why you want to be a physician that is really going to draw them into wanting to talk to you.
Okay. Awesome.
All right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.